Animal Land by John Hauge. Chapter 10. A Lion in the Ointment. The next morning came fast. Look who's here. The sudden noise woke Ronald. It was the kind of awakening that put pain all through his body. His eyes were just about to provide a clear picture of the source of the noise when the noise came again, this time with a little less pain. So, what dragged in the cat? Ronald recognized that it was his dad's voice asking the question. He replied with one word. Clay. Clay, you must want to talk about Everett and Dominic. Ronald was glad that he could get right to the point. Yes, I want to talk about Everett and Dominic some more. They sure have built a lot and have had a pretty good stretch of peace. Am I being too close-minded about all of this? Ronald's father was not impressed with the achievement of construction and peace. Son, while it is true that the animals have not had to engage in warfare with man, they also have not been allowed to engage in the activities they wish. Our ostensive defenders of animal land, Dominic and Everett, have taken the place of man by removing the freedom of individual animals to lead individual lives. The population has passively decided to exchange this freedom for the hospital area and water. Our youngest generation has not had to struggle. This generation's lack of first-hand knowledge cannot be replaced by a dissemination of information from within the den because their parents seem to have lost the will to stand up for the principles of Animal Land's founders. Bless them all. They have their water and they have their peace. Ronald was confused. What had started as criticism seemed to end in praise. Was his father agreeing with the camels? Certainly his actions to date, or better yet, lack of action, seemed to agree with his words. Maybe Dad needs provoking, thought Ronald. Maybe I need to play devil's advocate. Water and peace. These are both good, are they not? Ronald knew better, but thought if he continued to poke his father, he'd get more wisdom. After a short growl, Alice Starr replied, There was a time when parents taught the young how to find water, find food, fight man, and build defenses. Animal Land is now the nurturing mother to the young and the caretaker father of the old. It is your generation, son. How is your generation going to fix this? From behind Ronald's body came a shout, They're going to vote for Dominic. The sound came from a voice near the entrance of the den. It was Charles who made the Dominic comment. The lead tiger, Jesse, and Stuart were also with Charles. Charles continued. Ronald, don't you think it is time for new leadership? Ronald was somewhat relieved that the assembly was not for something serious. He responded, You all have come to talk about the upcoming elections? Stuart answered, Yes, we have. Well, who has stepped forward to challenge Dominic and Everett? Ronald waited for a reply. No one answered. Who? Ronald asked again. Who? The looks on their faces suggested that no one was going to answer. Jesse was looking at him. Stuart was not. Stuart was never into intrigue. Charles was also looking at him. Ronald started feeling a bit self-conscious. He wondered if a colorful flower petal had fallen on his head or some other embarrassing thing. What? Ronald's eyes took another scan across the group. Silence continued as the animals seemed focused on mentally projecting their wishes into Ronald's head. Ronald scratched his ear, both to rid himself of a possible flower petal and to symbolically swipe off their mental wishes. After more silence, it became more obvious as to why the three were facing him. He was the object of intrigue. Me? Yes, you, affirmed the leader of the Tigers. Maybe the experiment with non-lion leaders was over, Ronald thought. He did not hesitate before thinking about how to start the change. If I'm to do this, I need to get more animals on my side. Stuart replied, The largest voting block was located at the animal hospital area. Well, then I reckon this is where I must go. Ronald had thought about initiating a challenge for the leadership of Animal Land, but he was waiting for a sign that enough animals finally saw what he had been seeing. The sign was now here. Half of the leading animals have decided that it was up to him to change the direction. Ronald went back to his father's words. How is my generation going to fix the problem of Animal Land as nurturing mother and caretaker father? The answer? Elect a new leader who will restore the 4 laws. Ronald now felt he was ready for the challenge. Omega. The hospital area had traditionally been populated by Dominic and Everett supporters. Maybe approaching each animal individually would be a good strategy, thought Ronald. Without peer pressure, maybe I could get them to change their vote, continued his thought process. Ronald now felt he was ready for the challenge. As Ronald walked through the area, the sheer number of animals brought a glimpse of the futility of the effort to dethrone Dominic and Everett. I remember the first animal to be treated, he thought. No wonder there wasn't much discussion about costs anymore, only mandates to take more action to relieve the plight of those in need. The hospital area had become quite a spread. It was a virtual animal land within animal land. He looked around. Some animals he had seen on the job on one of the various projects, but most animals he had not seen. They seemed to have found their way here even without a work injury. After several conversations, his first impression proved to be valid. Those receiving care were entrenched in keeping anyone that champions the hospital area as leader of Animal Land. What about the workers? Ronald looked around. Soon his eyes came across a familiar elephant. Hello, Willard, Ronald began. I recall you coming over to help out during the dam project. Yes, the dam project turned out to be much more demanding than the usual defensive work. Here, the pace is slower. We get the best food, and we get special attention from Everett and Dominic. Willard used his trunk to point out all of the animals sitting around talking. Ronald's eyes followed Willard's trunk out of courtesy. He had already seen the scene and did not wish to dwell any more on it. Ronald changed the subject. Well, you may or may not know, but I am running for Animal Land leader. Willard's sleepy, happy expression quickly changed to a defensive, concerned look. But we have a leader. In fact, we have two leaders, Dominic and Everett. Ronald replied in an assertive teacher's voice. Yes, but you know the founding animals never intended the leader to be leader for life. I think it is time to get back to our four laws. A new leader can do this. But this has already happened. Everett will step down and retire. Only Dominic is going to run for leader of Animal Land. I don't think that is the change that the founding animals had in mind. Willard's concerned look morphed into fear. If Dominic is defeated, what happens to the hospital area? Ronald softened his voice a bit to ease this fear. I reckon that we will look at the original justification and intent for this place and reevaluate the current state of affairs to see if it is living up to its promise. Recall, we were only going to treat the slightly injured animals with the idea of returning them to work quickly. I look around this place, and while I hate to prejudge before all the facts are in, I figure that this ain't happening. Ronald's tone change did not help. Willard now looked scared. In a voice to match the look on his face, he replied to Ronald. But then, most of us will have to leave all of this. Perhaps, but you could go back and do what you normally do. Go back and live your life free to do what you want to do. There was a time that would be attractive, but I've got everything I need here. Outside the hospital area, we would have to get our own food and water. We would have to build our own den. I think Dominic and Everett know what is best. Ronald tried an emotional appeal. But many other animals are laboring very hard to provide all of the food for this place and for the dens of all of the workers of this place. This is infringing on their rights under the fourth law. There are fewer animals working on the fence project today than there had been back on the dam project. We need your help, partner, to prepare for war. Animal Land needs your help. Ronald saw the attention waning from Willard. Willard repeated, I think Dominic and Everett know what is best. Ronald noted that the words had a soothing effect on Willard. Willard's fear subsided back to worry. Ronald continued his argument anyway. Those two, Everett and Dominic, have failed us on the first law. We need to get back to following these laws, or Animal Land will cease to exist as we know it. Ronald intended the statement to provoke a reaction. However, the reaction he got was not what he had expected. Willard's worried look disappeared, giving way to a smile and half-chuckle. Now you're talking foolishness, Ronald. Everett and Dominic know what they are doing. They care about us injured animals. They have brought peace. They've given us that great dam. As long as we re-elect Dominic, we will continue to have peace. Now it was Ronald who was worried. The elephants were the most independent of the animals. No animal was strong enough to force them to do anything. However, it seems that words were stronger than muscle. Well, some words, that is, concluded Ronald, apparently not my words. Ronald listened. He nodded, not to signal agreement, but to acknowledge the conclusion he had just formed in his head. Ronald struck up the same conversation with other injured animals. Just like with Willard, the message that Dominic cares and Everett has brought peace seems to outweigh the logic of showing how the four laws were not being followed. Ronald gave it half the day before giving up on the idea of picking up support from these animals for himself as leader. Ronald had heard more illogical nonsense in the past 4 hours than he had ever heard in his life. He was heading out of the hospital area when someone familiar appeared in the corner of his eye. Several recovery areas over was a lioness, a very pretty lioness. A feeling of dread shot through his body as he could only think the worst as to why she was there. He quickly walked to her. Murray? Why, hi there, Ronald. What happened to you? I guess I might have overexerted myself on the fence project. I didn't think it was that bad, but the Dr. Chimps insisted that it was very serious and wouldn't let me leave. Ronald was skeptical of the seriousness of Marty's injury, but decided to play along for the moment. I'm sorry for your plight. Hopefully this is only a temporary setback. Mari nodded agreement and then changed the subject. It is good to see you, even under these circumstances. I'm lucky you found me in this place. Ronald agreed. The hospital area was big enough for even an elephant to get lost in, let alone a lion. Well, I was talking to some of the animals, and then, suddenly, I saw a stunningly pretty lioness out of the corner of my eye, and I figured it was either you or you're some unknown identical twin. I imagine I look pretty wretched now. You still look as pretty as that spree lioness I kissed up on the bluff. Ronald was happy to see that his banter still had the same desired effect on Mari. Why, Ronald, it is nice to know that something other than a threat from man can still catch your attention. Man's threat is real. It is. Mari cut him off. She was sick of hearing about politics. Although she'd better not tell the Dr. Chimps, lest they insist on curing her of political sickness. She might never get out of the hospital area. She wondered if Ronald had decided to have more time for her. What's real is me waiting at my den and that you haven't called on me. I have been busy. I'm running for leader of Animal Land. But Ronald having more time for her was probably more wishful thinking, thought Mari. Ronald continued. Besides, I thought you were mad at me. That was true, Mari thought. I was mad at Ronald, but that did not mean I didn't want him to come and see me and take me out on a date. Yes, I know. I've heard that you've been around bad-mouthing Dominic and Everett. Elliot told everyone that you were running and that you wanted to close down the hospital area. Elliot seems to know that he was going to run for leader before he did, noted Ronald. I've never said any such thing. Elliot told you this. He announced it to the entire group. This was a little disappointing. Did Elliot say this to denigrate him, or just because he didn't know any better? Ronald thought to himself. He couldn't decide. Everett probably sent Elliot on this errand in anticipation of my run for leader. Ronald switched his thoughts back to his conversation with Mari. Never mind Elliot. It's so great to see you again, Mari. Hearing your voice. Seeing you again. I can't believe how little you've changed. Finally, Ronald was talking about something important, Mari thought. Let's go back to a time when it was just the two of us, a time when I didn't have to share him with Animal Land. Thanks. How about you? You were the young cub who was going to maul all of the men, attack all of the gazelles, and pursue all of the lionesses. Well, 2 of the 3 ain't bad, I reckon. So, my dearest Mari, let's see what is keeping the prettiest lion off of the prairie and cooped up here in the hospital area. I guess a compliment deserves a quick look, thought Mari. She raised her leg so that Ronald could see. I came in due to some soreness in my little old leg, but after the treatment and prescribed bed rest, I found it hard to get back on my paws. My paws are all swollen. It hurts to walk. Let me see your other paws. You're not a doctor. Her voice implied that Ronald was inferior. Yes, true, but neither is my father, nor your parents, nor any of the chimpanzees before Bernard's speech. grinding organs, collecting coins in a cup, and sitting for pictures with little humans were their main skills taught over many generations during circus captivity. Ronald didn't vocalize this. Ronald knew Mari knew this, but maybe she had forgot. We used to take care of ourselves. Let's see them lovely paws of yours. Ronald looked at Mari's paws. Indeed, they were swollen. Ronald tried to stretch out the hind leg. Mari growled, "Grr, ar, 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 ar." When was the last time you went out on the prairie? A while. Why? I remember my father telling me old stories told to him from animals who lived in the circus stays. On the long trips, the animals would be caged for many days and nights, and their paws would get swollen. From what I remember, your paws seem to be displaying the same symptoms. The fact that stretching hurts validates this diagnosis. The choice of the word diagnosis was deliberate. Chimps were not the only animal capable of learning and using a medical vocabulary. How do you know for sure? The medical chimps told me to put this ointment on my feet for a couple more weeks. Or at least until after the election has passed, Ronald thought to himself. Mari continued. Only after this treatment will they be ready to begin physical therapy. Of course, physical therapy was code for doing what should have been done earlier, continued Ronald's silent analysis. You mean walking? Ronald looked into Mari's eyes. The medical argument would be a draw at best. Another tactic would be needed. I couldn't just let her stay here laid up, Ronald thought. Ronald changed subjects. Do you like it here? Well, look around. We do have everything we need here. Ronald looked around. Mari's recovery area was larger than Alice Starr's living area. This thought also reminded him that he had never established a den for himself. Well, with the defense work and all of the projects, it was easier to stay with his father when not camping out on the prairie or on the project job site. Mari continued, and the staff is so friendly. They are so kind to help me in my time of need. By Ronald's thinking, the staff had probably caused more harm than good. Lions are lazy by nature, but certainly not bedridden. Lions need to run on the open prairie in order to stay healthy, especially mentally healthy. Yes, I suppose in their mind, they have been helping. Ronald was not really agreeing, but wanted Mari to come up with a more focused answer. But do you like it here? As opposed to being on the hunt, stalking a poor, lame gazelle. Oh no, on the range is much better. Phew, Ronald was worried that all was lost. No lion can resist the image of a lame gazelle. It was the timeless bedtime story retold by all lionesses to their cubs. Once the thought of a better place other than the hospital area was planted in Mari's mind, Ronald was ready to move in for the kill. Do you trust that I've got your best interest in heart and that I could never hurt you? Well, yes. Of course. Mari's reply had some hesitation. She was not sure what was coming next. Her hesitation was justified as Ronald leaped in for the kill. Then come with me now. Leave this place. Mari's eyes flashed an I don't think I should message, but without an immediate no, Ronald sensed his prey starting to change directions. Remember, as a young cub, who pulled you out of the water? Mari smiled. You told me to jump in. Well, it was better than continuing that conversation with the hyenas. Mari nodded. Yes, you were right. A risk of drowning was better than the certainty that would come with continuing the so-called talk with the hyenas. The first time they had met, Ronald had saved her life. She knew from this first meeting that he was courageous, cunning, and strong. Unfortunately, he always seemed more interested in playing hunting games with his friends rather than spending time with her. However, he didn't fail her then, and somehow she knew he wouldn't fail her now. Mari got up on all fours. The pain was sharp and instant. Ronald saw this in her expression. He felt for her, but knew this was a necessary step. Put your paws on my back. A medical chimp, who was suspicious of Ronald's presence, had been watching. The talk didn't concern him, but the ensuing action did. He swung down and into Mari's recovery area. Hey, Mari is not ready to be discharged. Ronald let out a roar that caught the attention of all in the hospital area. The chimp disappeared rather quickly following the roar. Despite the pain, Mari's expression changed to one of amusement, if only temporarily. She tied the chimp's actions with the hyena's story. It looks like this time the medical chimp decided not to continue the talk. As the two of them left the hospital area, Ronald reflected. If Mari could trust that he had her best interest in heart, why couldn't the other animals trust him? Why couldn't they trust that the founding animals also had their best interests in heart when they wrote the 4 laws? Maybe the pain was too great to leave the comfort and ease of the hospital area and return back to the wild and open areas of Animal Land. Omega, I'm not paying you to paint the grass. The shout came from an excited and somewhat shrilled voice. The man doing the work was at first startled, but then acknowledged the statement. Damned stinking animal, he thought to himself. He took a break and went to get a drop cloth to protect the grass. As he dipped the paintbrush back into the can, he repeated his thought. Damned stinking animal. He looked up to see if the animal could hear his thoughts, but the animal had already jumped on another man working around the windows. He couldn't hear the words. The flying of the spit made it obvious that the animal was just as unhappy with the other guy as the animal was with him. The man then observed a smaller camel walk up to the other man at the window, who was being spit at by the larger camel. Dad, what's wrong? You see, Lizzie, I constantly have to inspect the work of man. The process of building a house is one of endless contractors trying to take one shortcut after another. Shortcut? I found in this case that rather than put up the fence and paint before unrolling the sod, it's put the grass down first and then act surprised when the paint gets all over the grass. I have to correct them. I must watch over their every move to make sure that they do it right. Stupid man. I wish they were as smart as us camels. Yes, you sure did show them who's in charge. I don't want you to forget because ultimately this will be your house to rule from. The daughter turned her head to look over the house, this time with a vision of herself on the porch with a dozen men managing the grounds. It was a pretty picture. It put a warm feeling inside of her like man's hot chocolate. How proud she was to have such a wise father. The greatest and wisest camel in all of Animal Land, she thought. She turned back to her father. The pride of her dad was reflected back at the pride Everett had in his daughter. Everett, too, had seen the same porch vision with his daughter commanding the men. It was against Everett's better judgment, but he and his daughter needed to leave. They had tickets for the latest hospital area show and did not want to miss the show. They left the men behind to finish painting the fence. The daughter turned her head to look over at the house once again and see it in the present. The white picket fence of the small group of houses on the prairie symbolized the peace and tranquility of the area just as much as the swaying of the tall grass in the breeze. At close range, the smell of the paint on the fence would give away the age of the homes. Potted plants in the windowsills also added to the appearance. The mailboxes were all decorated. One had palm trees painted on the sides. At the base were fresh flowers. Her father's name on the box was in colorful letters with a pretty script. She had seen this type of elegant writing before, but couldn't place where she had seen it. Omega. After escorting Mari back to her den, Ronald continued the campaign. He knew where Margaret stood, but there were other horses. His desire to avoid Margaret was such that he hadn't been in the horse area in quite a while. The smell of meat entered his nostrils and started to irritate his brain. Why am I not smelling grasses in Forbes? He pondered to himself. This isn't right. Over the hill came the answer. Margaret's dried meat works had become big business. It seemed like most of the horse population was involved. Ronald strolled through the area. Something else looked odd. The distribution wasn't mixed. It was mainly young horses. Ronald approached one. Hi, I'm Ronald. I'm running for leader of Animal Land. Well, hello. I've heard a lot about you. Margaret tells me that you want to stop Bernard's projects and have the animals go back to individual lives. Yes, I reckon that is about right. Not too bad of an analysis. What are your thoughts on such a prospect? Well, for one, Animal Land wouldn't need as much dried meat with you as leader. The dried meat work allows us to trade for lots of fruit, especially apples. Without Dominic and Everett, it is back to grazing on bland prairie grass. No thanks. The somber, vocal tone of the word grazing surprised Ronald. It's pretty common for horses to graze. Why is this so bad? This is like hearing a lion complain about hunting prey. Before his mind jumped to a conclusion that he would never hear a lion complain about hunting, he caught himself. Hold that sentiment. These are strange times. I see. However, partner, did you all consider what would happen if man were to? Margaret interrupted. Just like out on the prairie, she snuck up on Ronald and appeared without notice. What brings you out to our small piece of animal land, Ronald? Just some politicking. No sense in trying to hide the obvious, Ronald noted to himself. Quite a spread you have here, Margaret. Staffed with all horses. Yes, of course. As herbivores, we have very little product loss. I suppose not. I have answered the call of Bernard, and we are supplying all of the sick and injured and needy animals with high-quality food. We have really. The sound of the words faded away until Margaret appeared to be mouthing the words. I don't need to listen to how great she is or how wonderful a job she is doing supplying food for the needy, Ronald said to himself in a disgusted voice. Ronald continued his thinking. I don't recall Bernard using the word needy. Sick and injured, yes. Needy, no. Ronald continued his fake smile as Margaret continued to mouth more words. I seem to recall that us lions had also played a part in supplying food for the needy, he thought. Margaret didn't seem to want to stop talking, so Ronald turned away and walked off. Thanks for the information. It was interesting, he said over his shoulder. There was still time left in the day to pay a visit to the animals working on the fence. The fence construction areas may be a better source of votes. At the top of the hill again, Ronald saw some animals working. Elliot was there also, but working really couldn't describe his activities. Ronald headed off in that direction. The procedure of erecting the fence was the same as he remembered. He seamlessly joined the others, and in less than a minute proved himself more helpful than Elliot. Elliot, sensing a clear-cut case of excessive manpower, took the opportunity to leave. Ronald approached some tigers. I'm running for leader of Animal Land. One of the tigers stepped forward to speak for all of the animals on the fence crew. We know. Any questions I can answer for you? If you win, will we have to continue working on the fence project? No. We will return to what we've always done. You work for yourselves and your family, unless we need you for defense. And right now, I think those that need to contribute more on defense are lying down in the hospital area right now. All of the workers were happy with the answer. I think I speak for the group when I say that you can count on our support. Ironically, the animals who were exerting the most physical effort to support Dominic and Everett were not the true believers that he encountered in the hospital area. This day's politicking had no surprises. However, based on size, Ronald figured that there were more animals in the hospital area or working for the hospital area than there were working on the fence project. Ronald ended the day out in the countryside, away from the dam and hospital areas, talking to a gathering of older animals. They were animals with similar understanding and reasoning as his. It was a small consolation to what was becoming apparently obvious. The group dispersed to their home dens. Ronald started heading for his father's den, but then caught himself. He headed for Mar-E's den instead. It was a bit off his normal roaming area. The entrance had many flowers of a variety of colors. The moss floor, as opposed to the normal dirt floor, stood out because it was soft and squishy. There was no mistaking that this lion den was assembled by one without a mane. Ronald, welcome to my home. Why, thank you. Good to see you up on your feet. It's just like you said. I walked for 15 minutes every hour since coming home, and the pain is gone and my paws are back to normal. It's amazing how quickly a couple of weeks can pass by. Ronald was referring to the medical chimp's estimate of her recovery time. What can I say? You were right and the medical chimps were wrong. Ronald hesitated. Mari was very pretty, he noted. He then envious. I can't believe I haven't called on you for so long. Finally, thought Mari. Well, why don't you lie down here by me and we can make up some lost time. Omega. The campaign continued for a few more days, but there really wasn't any change in the groups. The voting took place across Animal Land. The chimps kept track of the votes and soon announced the winner. Those that benefited from Dominic's projects outnumbered those working on Dominic's projects. Hence, Dominic was resoundingly elected on a platform of peace and plenty. Everett and I have dedicated our lives to serve the animals of Animal Land. We have given them water, medical services, and a generation of peace. All true, thought Ronald. It just doesn't reflect what they have taken away from the animals of Animal Land. Ronald had put up a logical campaign based on returning Animal Land to a village of animals governed by the principles of the Four Laws. Unfortunately, after Dominic and Everett, the young animals thought Ronald was trying to change Animal Land into something new. The dam and hospital area industries were tied to so many animals' daily lives that only the coalition of working animals and older animals voted for Ronald. Ronald did gain Mari's vote. She walked on her own in front of the same chimps that said she couldn't walk in order to put her mark on the tree. However, there wasn't enough time to do the same one-on-one intervention with all of the others. Besides, she wasn't a true hospital area animal, as she did work on the dam project and the fence project before being injured. Omega. With the election over, now I've got plenty of time, Ronald thought to himself. He headed back to tell Alistar that he had failed. Stuart tagged along for a bit. You have done a great job here, Stuart. Heck, what am I saying? Not just here, but with the hill defenses and the dam. You've done a job worthy of mention in the stories for the next generation. Perhaps, but I fear that it is all for naught. This is not the Animal Land my father once told me about. When man attacks again, I fear that many animals will die. I'm not sure whether even a small fraction of the animals would know. What? To do if we were attacked? I reckon you're speaking truth. Most of the young predator animals don't even hunt for their own food anymore. Yes. Also, many of the gatherer animals don't even have to roam to find water. It is all funneled from the dam, right, to their dens. We've become quite lazy. Enslavement or being eaten are almost assured for any animal that stays in Animal Land. Stuart paused as the conversation moved from simply complaining to an outright call for action. Yes, I'm afraid you're right. Stuart and Ronald parted ways. Ronald was holding out a small sliver of hope that Stuart would disagree, but Stuart did not. If Stuart could see it, then it had to be true. Animal Land had no future. Omega. A bit more traveling for Ronald, and he arrived at Alistar's place. Dad, the election is over. Alistar did not look up. I'm afraid there is not enough opposition to halt Dominic. Alistar again did not look up. What's wrong, Dad? Another pause. Are you ill? No response. Maybe some sarcasm could trigger a response. Perhaps a trip to the hospital area? Alistar's eyes glared back as if waiting to pounce. A few years ago, there may have been fear in Ronald, but now just an internal grin of accomplishment. I'm afraid it is my time, began Alistar. Your time. Ronald still had not put two and two together. Alistar repeated with a more somber tone, my time. As Ronald watched Alistar's eye muscles relax, it dawned on him what Alistar meant. Probably wasn't the best idea to make the hospital area comment, Ronald thought to himself. I've lived my life according to the Four Laws. I did my duty and will go into the sunset knowing that the wisdom of the founding animals is secure in my son. Alistar's words prevented Ronald from making a sympathetic statement. Alistar continued. The Four Laws have been what is best for Animal Land. Each generation rebels, but in the end, they come back to the Four Laws. Ronald wanted to challenge the statement, but decided against. My last contribution to Animal Land will be to leave you with this insight from one who has observed the rise of Dominic and Everett and have studied their actions. The founding animals were so focused on the fight for freedom and the establishment of a place where no animal would ever live under the tyranny of man that I think they forgot about the ambitions of their fellow animals. Ronald watched Alistar's lips as he listened intensely. There was not going to be a repeat of this lesson. This would be the final lesson from a father to a son. Alistar continued. Inside animals also rests the desire to dominate. I don't think the founding animals recognized this, because they were blinded by their devotion to the Four Laws. They were so united in the common cause to establish Animal Land that they ignored their own individual desires to be the top leader. Ronald repeated the last phrase, Devotion to the four laws? He did this in part to help him remember and in part to come to grips with the notion that the founding animals had a flaw. How is this a problem? The founding animals did not envision individual animal ambition to rule. For some to rule, the four laws had to be challenged. Once challenged, then traditional animal leaders with traditional backgrounds were no longer required. Ronald injected, like camels. Not wanting to get off subject, Alice Starr continued. This isn't about one animal, but that there can exist within some animals the same desires as man. Once the four laws lose their importance, individual animal ambition takes over. Individual ambition can be at odds with the good of all animals. Yes, at odds with the good of all animals, Ronald repeated, still trying to memorize what would certainly be his last lesson. Although, some of what Alice Starr was saying sounded like he was repeating himself. Son, there is no doubt that Dominic, Everett, and their helpers have benefited the most, as they have managed to change the devotion to the four laws into the devotion to Dominic and Everett. Ronald thought, finally, Dad was voicing criticism. He added, yes, they have. Starting with Bernard's insistence of medical care so he could carry out his vision. Ronald, my son, as long as one lion knows the four laws, there will always be an animal land. What about that, Murray? We're back together again. Good. You've got a wonderful mate in that, Murray. I now know my legacy will live on beyond even your lifetime. Alice Starr seemed to abruptly stop the conversation. Ronald felt a sadness come up on him from downwind. At a point in his life where the once boring lessons were now not only appreciated, but savored, there would be no more. He had known that leaving Animal Land when it was time was his father's plan since he was a cub. Alice Starr moved out of his den and towards the prairie frontier. There wasn't an exchange of goodbyes. Alice Starr wanted his last words to be constructive words. Ronald watched until Alice Starr had cleared the first hill. He could follow his father until the edge of Animal Land, but what for? I had started watering, and it wasn't the prairie dust. He went over the conversation again in his head, did not recognize the nature of animals to also want to dominate, blinded by their devotion to the four laws. Once the four laws lose their meaning, individual animal ambition takes over. Individual animal ambition can be at odds with the good of all animals. Repeating the words helped with the watering. Alice Starr had cleared another hill. There was one more rise in the landscape to see him, but that would depend on Alice Starr's path. He thought about the hospital services. They could have extended Alice Starr's life for a bit longer, like they did for Bernard. Of course, this also means that Alice Starr would end up being buried within Animal Land, as the strength to make the journey would be lost in the final years. Alice Starr had said before that he was not going to be a statue. Ronald recalled his father's words and repeated them out loud. The founding animals didn't want a shrine to them. The four laws were their shrine. If the founding animals did not rate statues, then I don't rate a statue. This is what his father had told him. True to his word, Alice Starr set off into the frontier to keep his word. Ronald had one final thought. Without his father, there really wasn't anything left to hold him to Animal Land.